Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I've got a story for you that's going to make your jaw drop, because it's about how one woman's entire life changed. All because of 2 Super Bowl tickets. Now, imagine this. You work day and night, give up your weekends, miss out on everything just to crush a huge project at work. And when you finally succeed, your boss steals the reward you earned and thinks he can get away with it. But what he didn't know was that he had just messed with the wrong woman. This isn't just a story about football tickets. It's about betrayal, revenge, and how one smart move can flip the entire game. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear is not just sweet revenge. It's legendary. Let me tell you the story of Revenge Jessica, and how her boss's arrogance became his downfall. For 4 long months, Jessica lived off caffeine and sheer willpower. She wasn't the type to complain, but if you asked her, she'd tell you. Those months nearly broke her. Early mornings, late nights, and weekends spent in front of her laptop, drowning in spreadsheets instead of brunches with friends. While everyone else lived their lives, Jessica was buried under deadlines and data, chasing something bigger than herself. You see, this wasn't just another project at the firm. This was the project, the kind that could make or break a career. A multi-million-dollar account that no one believed she could land. And Jessica, she poured her entire soul into it. She skipped family dinners, turned down every invitation, sacrificed sleep, health, and peace of mind. All because she knew, if she nailed this, everything in her life could change. And she did. After months of revisions, sleepless nights, and endless stress, the day finally came. Jessica walked into that client meeting like a warrior stepping onto a battlefield. And when it was over, she had won. The client was thrilled. The presentation was flawless. The contract was signed. She had delivered something no one else in the company could. But that wasn't the best part. It happened later that afternoon. Jessica sat at her desk, rubbing her tired eyes, when her email pinged. She clicked it, probably expecting another meeting invite or some boring company memo. But instead, there it was. An email from the client. The subject line read, "Thank you, Jessica." She opened it, and her breath caught in her throat. Inside was a message she would read over and over again in the days to come. "Jessica, you went above and beyond. This was the best work we've ever seen. Consider these a personal thank you. Enjoy the game." Attached to the email were 2 Super Bowl tickets. But not just any tickets. Front row. 40-yard line. A once-in-a-lifetime experience. Jessica sat frozen in her chair, staring at the screen like she couldn't believe her eyes. As a lifelong football fan, this wasn't just a gift. It was a dream she never even thought she could touch. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her hands trembled as she clicked on the attachment, double-checking the details. It was real. She printed the email, holding the paper in her hands like it was solid gold. She could already picture the moment. Her boss, Robert Faulkner, would walk into her office, maybe for the first time ever, with a genuine smile on his face. He would hand her those tickets, say something like, "You've earned this, Jessica." And in that moment, it would all be worth it. The long nights, the sacrifices, the years of being overlooked. Because this wasn't just about football. This was about finally being seen, being valued. Jessica leaned back in her chair, eyes still locked on the printed email. She imagined herself at the game, hearing the roar of the crowd, feeling the electric buzz of the stadium lights. She thought about how good it would feel to sit there, not just as a fan, but as a woman who fought tooth and nail and finally won. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to smile. Not the polite professional smile she wore around the office, but a real one. The kind that comes from knowing you did something impossible and finally it paid off. What Jessica didn't know was that this victory, the one she had worked so hard for, was about to be stolen right out from under her. And that's when everything changed. 3 days. That's how long Jessica's happiness lasted. For 3 days, she walked into the office with a spark in her step, feeling like maybe, just maybe, all the hard work, all the sleepless nights had finally paid off. She imagined herself at the Super Bowl, front row, 40-yard line, living a dream most people only fantasized about. And then, Robert Faulkner walked into her office. He didn't knock. He never knocked. Robert wasn't the type of boss who respected boundaries. No, he strolled in like he owned the place. And in many ways he thought he did. Robert Faulkner was everything Jessica despised in corporate culture. Smug, arrogant, entitled. The kind of man who smiled at you with his mouth but looked at you like you were replaceable. That day, he leaned casually against her desk, like he had just dropped by for a friendly chat. But Jessica knew something was off. His grin wasn't friendly, it was calculated. "I heard you got some exciting news," he said, voice smooth like oil. Jessica smiled politely, hoping that this was finally the moment. Maybe he'd hand her the tickets, offer some awkward but genuine acknowledgement. She nodded. "Yeah, the client was incredibly generous. I really appreciate it." Robert's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, about that." Jessica felt a flicker of unease in her stomach. Robert exhaled dramatically, like he was about to deliver some great wisdom. "Here's the thing, Jessica," he began, lowering his voice like they were conspiring. "Clients, they don't always understand how things work in corporate. When they gave you those tickets, they didn't realize it wasn't really a personal gift. It was more a gesture to the firm." Jessica blinked, not quite believing what she was hearing. "The email was pretty clear," she said carefully. "It said they were a personal thank you." Robert waved a hand, dismissing the detail like it was nothing. "Sure, but in this business it's all about relationships, strategy, and sometimes we need to make executive decisions for the greater good." He straightened up, fixing her with a condescending smile. "So, I'll be taking the tickets. I've already arranged to take an important investor to the game. It's a smart move for the company." Jessica's stomach dropped like a stone. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally managed. "That's not fair. The client gave them to me." Robert's smile tightened. "You should be grateful you even have this job, Jessica. That's the real reward here." The word stung more than she expected. It wasn't just about the tickets anymore. It was about everything. The long hours, the sacrifices, the way people like Robert always took credit, always stood on the backs of people like her and called it leadership. He patted her desk like she was a well-behaved employee. "I'm sure you understand." And just like that, he turned and walked out of her office, like he hadn't just ripped away something she'd earned with every fiber of her being. Jessica sat frozen, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her heart thundered in her chest, not just with anger, but with something sharper, betrayal. This wasn't about football tickets. This was about respect. About years of being overlooked, undervalued, and now outright robbed. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe, to stay composed. She knew better than to react emotionally. That's what people like Robert counted on, that you'd keep your head down and swallow it. But inside something shifted. Because what Robert didn't realize was that in that moment, he hadn't just stolen a pair of tickets. He'd declared war. And Jessica, she had no intention of losing. Jessica didn't react. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She didn't throw her chair or scream about fairness like she wanted to. Instead, she forced herself to smile. Not a real one, but the kind of smile that hides 1,000 sharp edges beneath it. She met Robert's smug eyes and said, as sweetly as she could, "Enjoy the game, Robert." He grinned, satisfied, like he'd just taught her a valuable lesson. Then he turned and walked away, believing the conversation was over. But Jessica's smile dropped the second the door closed behind him. Her hands clenched into fists under her desk, her nails digging into her palms so hard it almost hurt. She stared at the empty doorway, her jaw tight, her breath shallow. He really thought he could get away with it. Jessica sat there for a moment, forcing her heartbeat to slow. She knew she couldn't react emotionally. That's how people like Robert won. They thrived on making others feel small, powerless. But she wasn't powerless. Not now. Because Robert had just made a mistake. Big one. He thought he'd stolen something from her without consequences. What he didn't realize was that he had handed her the perfect weapon. Jessica leaned forward, opening her laptop. She pulled up the email, the one from the client, clear as day, saying the tickets were a personal thank you to her. She read it again, not because she needed to, but because it fueled the fire building inside her. She didn't need to confront Robert. That would go nowhere. People like him always had an excuse, always found a way to twist things back on you. No, if Jessica was going to do this, she had to be smarter. She grabbed her phone and drafted a message, keeping her tone casual, almost innocent. Hey, just wanted to say thanks again for thinking of me with those Super Bowl tickets. Turns out they were given to someone else at my firm. Hope to catch up soon. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Jessica didn't have to wait long. Less than a minute later, her phone buzzed. Are you kidding me? Who took them? A smile ghosted across Jessica's lips. She typed back, playing dumb. Not sure, honestly. I just know I never got them. No big deal though. The reply came instantly. No big deal. Those tickets were meant for you. Let me handle this. Don't say anything. Jessica set her phone down, her heart pounding. But now it wasn't from anger. It was anticipation. The game had changed. This wasn't just between her and Robert anymore. It was now between Robert and the client. And Jessica already knew who would win. She spent the rest of the afternoon quietly gathering information, listening more carefully than she ever had before. She knew Robert wouldn't be able to keep quiet. His ego wouldn't allow it. Sure enough, around lunchtime, she heard his voice carrying from the break room, bragging to a junior associate. Yeah, front row seats, he was saying. 40-yard line. It's gonna be insane. Taking a big fish with me, you know how it is. These deals are all about relationships. Jessica stayed out of sight, biting back a grin. He had no idea. He was walking straight into the trap. By the end of the day, she wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even anxious. No, now she was calm, collected, and laser-focused. Because Robert thought he had stolen her reward. But what he didn't know was that Jessica had just set the entire chessboard, and he had walked himself right into checkmate. By the next morning, the client's reaction landed like a bomb in Jessica's inbox. A short, sharp message that spoke volumes. Jessica, I can't believe what I'm hearing. This will be handled. Say nothing for now. Jessica read it twice, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She could almost hear the anger simmering beneath the polite words. Robert had no idea the storm that was quietly brewing behind the scenes. And Jessica? She wasn't about to interfere. No, she knew better than that. She wasn't going to scream or make a scene, or march into Robert's office demanding what was hers. That was what he would expect, for her to act emotional, irrational, powerless. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and waited. Because when powerful people get angry, they don't shout, they move pieces behind the curtain. And Jessica had just given her client every reason to start moving. The next few days felt like walking on a wire. Around the office, everything seemed normal. People laughed in the hallways, chatted by the coffee machine, went about their business as if nothing had happened. But Jessica knew better. She kept her head down, working quietly, but her ears were always open. And sure enough, Robert couldn't help himself. It started small whispers in the break room, snippets of conversation overheard in passing. Jessica caught him bragging more than once, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Big weekend coming up, he told one of the junior associates. 40-yard line seats at the Super Bowl. Can't pass up an opportunity like that. Jessica pretended not to notice, but every word fueled the fire. Later that afternoon, she heard him again. This time, he was standing by the elevators, speaking to another senior partner. Taking a potential investor with me, Robert was saying. Someone the firm's been trying to lock down for months. These are the kinds of moves that seal deals. Jessica said nothing. She kept her expression blank, her posture neutral. But inside she was smiling. Because she knew the truth. There was no investor. Robert hadn't arranged some grand, strategic business meeting. He was using those tickets, the ones meant for her, to impress someone who had nothing to do with the company. Jessica had done her homework. She'd quietly asked around, connected the dots. And she knew exactly who Robert was taking to the game. His brother-in-law. A man with zero business connections. No contracts to sign, no deals on the table. Just a free ride to the biggest game of the year, paid for by corporate funds and stolen credit. And Robert thought no one knew. Jessica closed her laptop, her pulse steady, her smile calm. The trap was set. Every move Robert made tightened the noose around his own neck. And the best part? He didn't even know he was playing the game. Friday afternoon arrived, and the office felt unusually quiet. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that settles in before a storm, when everyone feels something is coming but no one knows what. Jessica sat at her desk, pretending to focus on the spreadsheet in front of her, but her eyes kept drifting to the hallway. She was waiting for the moment, and sure enough, there he was, Robert Faulkner. He walked out of his office with a swagger in his step, and that signature smug grin plastered across his face. Sunglasses tucked into his shirt collar, coat slung over his arm like he was some celebrity stepping out of a press conference. Heading out early? One of the assistants asked casually as he passed by. Robert smirked. Big weekend. Got a flight to catch. Jessica glanced up just in time to catch his eyes flick toward her. He slowed down just for a second like he wanted to rub salt in the wound. Big plans this weekend, Jessica? He asked, voice dripping with fake politeness. Jessica smiled sweetly, like she hadn't spent the entire week laying a trap beneath his feet. Nothing special, she replied. Just catching up on some work. You know how it is. Robert grinned wider. Well, I'll be making moves. Enjoy your weekend. She nodded once. Enjoy the game. And with that, he strutted out of the building, his shoulders squared, the picture of a man who thought he'd won. Jessica watched him go, her expression calm, composed. She waited until the elevator doors closed behind him before she finally leaned back in her chair and let herself exhale. It was almost amusing, the way he walked out like a king, thinking the prize was already his. He didn't know that by the time he landed in that Super Bowl city, the pieces were already moving without him. Jessica's phone buzzed on her desk. She glanced down at the message. Meeting confirmed for Monday. Just play along. It was from the client. She smiled, but this time it wasn't forced. The real game wasn't on Sunday. No, the real game was going to happen Monday morning, right there in that glass-walled conference room. And Jessica was ready. She spent the rest of the weekend like a woman on the edge of something monumental. She didn't watch the Super Bowl. She didn't scroll social media or check updates about who was winning, who was performing at halftime. None of it mattered. Because for her, the real show wasn't happening in that stadium. It was waiting quietly behind closed doors, and when Monday came, Robert Faulkner was going to realize he'd been playing checkers while Jessica had been playing chess. And the final move. It was already locked in. Before we dive into what happened next, I want to know what you think so far. If you were in Jessica's shoes, how would you feel? Would you stay quiet like she did? Or would you confront your boss right away? Drop a comment below and tell me, because I promise you, things are about to get even crazier. Now let's get back to the story. Monday morning arrived like a drumbeat growing louder in Jessica's chest. The office was buzzing the way it always did on Mondays. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people shuffling to refill their coffee. But beneath that ordinary rhythm, there was an undercurrent of something else. Something sharp. Something about to snap. At exactly 9:07 a.m., Robert Faulkner strutted into the office. He looked like a man who had won the lottery. Sunglasses still on, coffee in hand, that smug smile stretched wide across his face. He barely glanced at anyone as he walked to his corner office, like he was untouchable. Jessica didn't even look up. She didn't have to, because 5 minutes later her inbox pinged. Subject: Client review meeting. Mandatory attendance. Location: Conference Room A. Attendees. Senior partners, client representative, Jessica Bennett. Jessica's pulse slowed. It was time. She clicked accept and stood, smoothing out her jacket like she wasn't about to watch the walls cave in around Robert. When she walked into the glass-walled conference room at precisely 9:30, the tension in the air was almost physical. Several senior partners were already seated, shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Robert sat at the head of the table, legs crossed, relaxed like a man who thought the meeting was a routine check-in. He glanced up when Jessica entered, offered her a brief nod, nothing more. Then the door opened again. The client walked in, sharp suit, polite smile, but he wasn't alone. A woman followed him. Jessica recognized her immediately from corporate memos and newsletters. Andrea Holloway, VP of Corporate Partnerships. She didn't smile. She didn't even glance at Robert as she took a seat beside the client. Robert's posture shifted, just slightly. The client leaned forward, folding his hands together, voice calm and casual. "Before we get into today's agenda," he began, "I have a quick question." His eyes flicked to Jessica. "Jessica, did you enjoy the game?" The entire room went still. Jessica met his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. "The game?" she asked, feigning confusion. He nodded once. "The Super Bowl." Jessica tilted her head, letting just a hint of confusion cross her face. "Oh," she said smoothly. "I didn't go." Silence. The kind of silence that stretches too long, that feels like it's pressing on everyone's lungs. The client's polite smile didn't waver, but the air in the room grew colder. He turned to Robert. "That's strange," he said. "Because I personally arranged for Jessica to have 2 front-row tickets, as a thank you for her hard work." Robert's fake composure faltered. He forced a short laugh, waving a hand like it was no big deal. "Yeah, well, there was a bit of a mix-up. Jessica couldn't make it, so." The client cut him off. "So who did?" Robert blinked, visibly scrambling. I took a client." The client let the words hang in the air like a blade. Andrea Holloway shifted in her chair, her eyes sharp. "Just so I understand, Robert," she said, her voice smooth but cutting. "You're saying you took corporate tickets that were personally gifted to an employee and gave them to someone else without informing her?" Robert's jaw clenched. "It was a business decision." The client leaned back, shaking his head slowly. "You know, I was looking forward to seeing Jessica at that game. Thought it would be a well-deserved reward. But imagine my surprise when I learned she never even got the tickets." Jessica sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't need to say a word, because Robert was unraveling all by himself. The client exchanged a glance with Andrea, who spoke next. "Robert, we're going to have a very serious discussion about this. But for now, please understand. This is no longer just about football tickets." Robert's face had gone pale. Jessica watched quietly, knowing exactly what was coming next. 'Cause the real game, it had only just begun. The room felt heavier with every second that passed. The client sat back in his chair, eyes locked on Robert, who now looked far less comfortable than he had 10 minutes ago. Gone was the smug, untouchable senior partner who had strutted into the office that morning. In his place sat a man shifting in his seat, his facade cracking inch by inch. "So, Robert," the client said, voice calm but cold, "since Jessica didn't use the tickets, who exactly did?" Robert cleared his throat, glancing around the table like he was searching for an escape route. He forced a thin smile, the kind that looked more like a grimace. "As I said earlier, I took a potential investor. Someone I've been cultivating for the firm." Andrea Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Who, specifically?" Robert's smile faltered. "Well, I'd rather not disclose client names without permission. It's sensitive." The client folded his arms across his chest, his gaze sharp. "Robert, I think we've moved past sensitive." The silence that followed stretched painfully long. The senior partners shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. No one spoke. No one wanted to be anywhere near the sinking ship in front of them. Finally, Andrea spoke again, her voice like ice. "Robert, who did you take to the game?" Robert's jaw flexed. His fingers tapped nervously against the polished table. Jessica sat motionless, her face neutral. But inside she could feel it, the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the trap snapping shut. Robert exhaled slowly, like a man who knew the fight was over but couldn't stop swinging. "It was my brother-in-law," he muttered. The words dropped like a stone into the silence. The client's eyebrows lifted, almost amused. "Your brother-in-law?" Robert nodded stiffly, not meeting anyone's eyes. Andrea glanced down at her tablet, then back up at him. "And this brother-in-law of yours? Does he have any business connection to the firm?" Robert's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "No." The client let out a short, humorless laugh. "So just to be clear, you took 2 front-row Super Bowl tickets, a personal gift meant for Jessica, gave one to yourself and one to your brother-in-law, who has no professional relationship with this firm whatsoever." Robert shifted again, his jaw tight. "I was trying to build goodwill." Andrea's tone sharpened. "With whom exactly?" He didn't answer. And that's when the final blow landed. Andrea tapped her tablet once more. "One more thing, Robert. Our finance team pulled your expense reports this morning." Robert's head snapped up. Andrea's eyes didn't leave him. "Would you care to explain why the firm was charged for your flight, hotel, meals, and transportation over the weekend?" Beat of silence. Jessica watched as the color drained from Robert's face. He started, then stopped, realizing there was nothing he could say that would make this look better. The client shook his head, leaning back in his chair like he'd already decided. "You used company money to take your brother-in-law to the Super Bowl, with tickets that weren't even yours to give." Robert opened his mouth to protest, but the client cut him off. "Do you know what that is, Robert? It's not a business decision. It's corporate theft." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Jessica sat quietly, her heart steady, her expression unreadable. Because in the end, Robert hadn't just stolen 2 tickets. He had stolen from the firm, from the client, from everyone who trusted him. And now there was no way out. The silence in the room after the word theft was deafening. Robert sat there, his hands twitching slightly on the table. His face drained of color. Every trace of arrogance, of that smug superiority he always carried, had vanished. It was like the weight of what he had done was finally settling on his shoulders, and it was crushing him. The client didn't look angry anymore. No, he looked done, like a man who had seen enough. He exhaled slowly and spoke, voice low but razor-sharp. "I don't think I can continue working with someone who would betray his own team like this." Robert's head snapped up. "Wait." But the client cut him off without even looking at him. He turned to Andrea Holloway instead. "I trust you'll handle the internal response." Andrea gave a single, curt nod. "Of course." Robert's eyes darted around the table now, looking for an ally, a lifeline, but there were none. The other senior partners avoided his gaze, their faces stiff and unreadable. No one was coming to his defense. Andrea straightened in her chair, her expression cool and controlled. "Effective immediately. Robert Faulkner is suspended pending termination procedures." Robert's mouth opened like he wanted to argue, but no sound came out. Jessica sat motionless, her face calm, but inside, her heart was racing. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was happening, it felt almost surreal. Andrea continued, her voice precise. "You are to leave the premises immediately after this meeting. HR will coordinate the next steps." It was done. Robert stared at the table, his entire career crumbling around him in real time. He looked like a man who had been blindsided by his own arrogance. The client let the silence linger a moment longer, then finally turned to Jessica. And when he spoke, his voice shifted, softer, clearer. "You know, Jessica," he said, "I should have been working with you from the very beginning." Jessica blinked, surprised. You were the one who made this deal happen. You were the one who earned that reward, he continued, his tone almost apologetic. And yet, I let someone else stand in your way. Jessica swallowed, trying to keep her emotions in check. You had no way of knowing. He shook his head. Maybe. But I see things clearly now. He stood, gathering his papers, then paused. We're going to revisit this account. And next time, I want you to be the one leading the conversation. Jessica nodded, her voice steady. I'd be honored. Andrea stood as well, glancing at Robert one last time. This meeting is over. Robert didn't move. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 30 minutes. His entire world shattered. The man who walked into the office that morning thinking he was untouchable had been stripped of everything in less than an hour. And Jessica. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't thrown a single punch. She had simply let him destroy himself. As she gathered her things and stood to leave, the client offered her one last nod of approval. Jessica walked out of that glass-walled conference room knowing one thing for certain. The game was over. And she had won. Jessica hadn't even made it back to her desk when Andrea Holloway caught up with her in the hallway. Jessica, Andrea said, her voice lighter now, almost warm. Do you have a minute? Jessica nodded, still reeling from everything that had just unfolded. Andrea gestured toward an empty office. Let's talk. Inside, Andrea didn't waste time. She slid a document across the desk, her eyes meeting Jessica's. I'll get straight to the point, Andrea said. You've been running this account for months. You've handled yourself with integrity, even when others didn't. You deserve more than a thank you. Jessica glanced down at the document. It was a formal offer letter. Promotion. Senior partner. A salary increase so large Jessica had to blink twice to make sure she was reading it right. Her breath caught in her throat. I don't know what to say, Jessica said quietly. Andrea gave her a rare smile. Say yes. Jessica met her eyes. I accept. Andrea stood, shaking her hand. Good. You've earned it. As Jessica stepped back into the hallway, everything felt surreal. The emails, the months of hard work, the stolen tickets. All of it had led to this moment. She had won. She had everything she wanted. But Robert wasn't done. An hour later, an email pinged in her inbox. Subject: HR meeting, immediate attendance required. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Course. She stood, gathering her notebook, and made her way to the HR office. Inside, Robert was already seated, looking more composed than he had in the conference room, but there was something desperate in his eyes. Denise, the HR manager, sat across from him, looking uncomfortable. Jessica, please take a seat, Denise said. Jessica sat, calm and quiet. Robert cleared his throat, trying to sound professional. Denise, I asked for this meeting because I need to report a serious breach of corporate policy. Jessica didn't react. Robert continued, his voice dripping with false concern. Jessica disclosed internal business matters to an external client without authorization. Specifically, she discussed the allocation of corporate gifts. Jessica arched a brow, but said nothing. Denise glanced between them. Jessica, do you have a response? Jessica folded her hands neatly on the table. I simply informed the client that the tickets he personally gifted me were no longer in my possession. I never disclosed strategy, financials, or any private information. Denise nodded, her face unreadable. Robert jumped in. Regardless, she involved a client in internal affairs. Denise held up a hand. Robert, after reviewing the email correspondence and the events of this morning's meeting, I can find no policy violation on Jessica's part. Robert's face twitched. Denise's tone hardened. You, however, used corporate funds for personal purposes and misrepresented a client gift. That is a clear violation of our ethical standards. Jessica didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply watched as Robert's last attempt to claw his way out crumbled. Denise stood. This meeting is over. Robert, please leave. Jessica, you're free to go. Jessica gathered her things and walked out without looking back. By the time she returned to her desk, a company-wide email had gone out. Effective immediately, Robert Faulkner is no longer with the firm. We wish him the best in his future endeavors. Jessica stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the weight of it sink in. Robert's empire had fallen, and she hadn't even had to raise her voice. She had simply told the truth, and let the truth do the rest. By the end of that Monday, Robert Faulkner's name was already scrubbed from the company directory. His office was locked, his email deactivated. It was like he had never existed. The whispers around the office were deafening. People talked in hushed tones by the elevators, side-eyed Jessica as she walked past. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew she was the one who brought him down. But Jessica didn't bask in it. She didn't gloat. She kept her head down, finishing her work, moving forward. The real reward wasn't Robert's downfall. It was what came next. Later that week, as she sat at her desk reviewing contracts, her phone buzzed. It was the client. Jessica answered, keeping her voice polite. "Hello." There was a pause, then his voice, light, almost amused. "Jessica," he said, "I assume you've heard the news." She allowed herself a small smile. "It's hard to miss." "Well," he continued, "I wanted to call because I've been thinking about you." Jessica's smile faded slightly, unsure where this was going. "You've spent years at that firm," he said. "You've done the work, carried the weight, and watched others take the credit. You're smart, strategic, and frankly, far too valuable to be wasted there." Jessica's heart raced. "So I'm making you an offer," he continued smoothly. "Come work for me. Lead my business strategy team. You'll have full authority, a team of your own, and I'll double whatever they're paying you now." Jessica blinked, caught completely off guard. "Double?" He chuckled. "You've earned it. And frankly, I don't want to waste another year dealing with anyone else." She sat there, staring at the wall as the weight of his words settled in. It wasn't just a job offer. It was freedom. A chance to step out of the shadow she'd been trapped in for years. To build something of her own. She didn't hesitate. "I accept." The next morning, her resignation letter was printed, signed, and delivered. When she handed it to HR, Denise looked up at her, surprised. "You're leaving?" Jessica smiled. "I got an offer I couldn't refuse." The news spread like wildfire. Some colleagues congratulated her quietly. Others watched her with something that looked like awe. Robert had tried to destroy her. Instead, he'd handed her everything she'd ever wanted. A year later, Jessica stood in her corner office, overlooking the city skyline. Her name was on the door now. Her team respected her. She worked for people who valued her, not people who tried to take from her. And as she scrolled through her phone that afternoon, a news alert caught her eye. Former executive Robert Faulkner files wrongful termination lawsuit against previous employer. Lawsuit dismissed. Jessica laughed under her breath, shaking her head. He was still fighting a battle that had ended long ago. He thought he had taken everything from her. But in the end he had lost everything. Jessica leaned back in her chair, letting the moment sink in, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. "He thought he stole my reward," she murmured to herself. "But in the end, I got everything he ever wanted." She glanced out at the city one more time, her smile widening. "That's the real game I won." And that's the story of how Jessica turned the tables. How she lost 2 Super Bowl tickets but ended up winning something far more valuable. Her freedom, her career, and her self-worth. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that sometimes the best revenge is letting people destroy themselves. When you know your worth and you stand your ground, no one can take away what's truly yours. Thank you so much for listening until the end. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of Jessica's story? What lesson would you take from this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading what you feel after these stories. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next incredible story coming your way. Until next time, take care and remember, Sometimes the quietest people make the biggest moves.